This talk is about God. It's about proving God really does exist. The proof is based not on religion, not on philosophy, but on science. What I'm going to tell you comes from my book, Proving God Exists, Physics, Cosmology, and the Universal Mind. At the end of our talk, I'll tell you how to get a copy of the book for free. It all started with another book, Does God Exist? That book contains a debate between a theist and an atheist. I came to the conclusion that the atheist had the better argument. He contends it's impossible to prove God exists for one simple reason. Our notion of God is incoherent. Why? Because when we talk about God, we really do not know what we're talking about. We don't know what we're talking about because we have no referent for God. There's no one we can point to. There's no one we can describe. For example, if you ask me, prove that Joe exists, I could just point to him and say, there he is. We can't do that with God. The reason we can't do that is because we can't see him, hear him, or observe him in any possible way. God is unobservable. It's not just that we don't have the right equipment or the right technology to observe God. It's that it's logically impossible to observe him. It's logically impossible because, and I quote, he is transcendent to the universe. He doesn't live here. He lives in a separate dimension of space and time. Plus, he's a spirit. So the atheist is correct. Our concept of God doesn't make sense. We have no idea what we're talking about. And we absolutely cannot prove something exists if we do not know what that something is in the first place. My purpose, then, is to redefine what we mean by God and then to prove it. Here is the general outline of my book. After the introduction, it's divided into omnipotence, omniscience, physics, and the universal mind. Let's start with omnipotence. Whatever else we mean by God, the one thing he has to be is omnipotent. Why? Because that's what we mean by God. He is almighty. He is the supreme being. If any force were more powerful than God, then that force would instead be God. Being omnipotent, God must also be omnificent, existential, ubiquitous, and eternal. My book contains details on each of these separate features, plus evidence to back it up. Can you think of anything that possesses all of these features? Can you think of anything that is omnipotent? Actually, there is one. It's the universe itself. The universe is omnipotent because it controls everything inside of it. Nothing else has that power or that reach. So, what am I saying? I'm saying the universe is God. God is the universe. And unlike the invisible spirit God we all grew up with, the universe can be referenced and can be observed. It's all around us. Is there any proof for this? Actually, yes. It's called grand unification. In physics, this is the theory that everything is one thing. It used to be that we divided up the universe into matter and energy, and we divided up energy into gravity, electricity, magnetism, the strong force, and the weak force. But recently, scientists have consolidated those 6 elements into just 2, the electro-weak force and the strong force. And scientists are confident that someday soon they will find evidence that the strong force also should be combined with the others. When that grand unification happens, we will know that everything in the universe is really one thing. We will know that all matter and all energy trace back to a single force. Everything that exists is part of it, and it controls everything that exists. So the scientific evidence for God is grand unification. There really is one all-powerful force that rules the universe, and it resides not outside the universe, not transcendent to it, but that force is the universe itself. The other major feature that God must possess is omniscience. Why? Because knowledge is power. To control anything, you have to know something about it. To control everything, you have to know everything. Otherwise, you cannot be omnipotent. So, omnipotence requires omniscience. Now, being omniscient also means God must be purposeful, conscious, immanent, and good. And the details for that are in the book. But for now, I'd like to focus on one particular aspect of omniscience, the universal mind. So far we have discussed omnipotence and omniscience. We skipped physics, and we have arrived finally at a critical stage, the universal mind. If God is the universe, and if God is conscious, then it follows the universe must be conscious. There must be a universal mind. In the book, I discuss several pieces of evidence that the universe does think. But right now I will present 3 of the main ones. First, the best evidence that the universe thinks is also the most obvious one. Can you guess what it is? It's us. It's you and me. It's humanity. The fact that we are conscious means that the universe is conscious as well. After all, we only reflect the universe that produced us. And that universe is what made it possible for us to think. The next piece of evidence that the universe thinks comes from quantum mechanics. That is the study of the fundamental particles that make up the structure of the universe. When we gaze out into space, we see an assembly of disparate objects separated by vast stretches of emptiness. For example, Proxima Centauri, the closest star outside our solar system, is 24 trillion miles away. In between is the black void of space. But whether you follow quantum mechanics or string theory or loop quantum gravity, they all agree on one thing. The vacuum of space is in fact made up of microscopic particles. They call it the atomic nature of space. Some liken it to a fabric. Others call it a foam. And it is a foam that stretches from one end of the universe to the other. And it is alive with energy. You and I are made up from this foam, and so is all the space between us. That means the universe is a single thing, not a collection of separate things. Finally, I'll give you one more piece of evidence. It's called epiphany. It comes from a Greek word meaning conversation with the gods. An epiphany is a eureka moment. It's a sudden insight, and it's usually an insight into something profound. Newton had an epiphany when the apple fell on his head. In her book entitled Epiphany, Elise Ballard interviewed 60 people from all walks of life who claimed to have had an epiphany, and they all reported a similar experience. First, the insight was indeed about something important. Next, it seemed like it didn't come from them. It felt like it came from outside of them. It felt like another person was speaking to them. And it felt like that other person was God. Now, granted, these were all subjective experiences. There is no solid proof that these were messages from God. But the fact that so many people from disparate backgrounds report the same experience is significant. And there's one thing that cannot be denied. The insights people gained from their epiphanies are often of vital importance, and some of them have even changed the course of civilization. So I have given you some of the evidence for a universal mind. They include the fact that the universe is connected. It's a single thing, a single body, suffused with energy. That body is at least partly conscious. We know that for certain. And possibly that body communicates with us. In summary, thank you for hearing me out and for having an open mind. I am aware that much more needs to be discovered before we can draw any definite conclusions. But I have given you a different concept of what God is. I don't think he's an old guy with a white beard. Nor do I think he's a disembodied spirit residing in another dimension. Instead, I think that God is all around us. He's here, not somewhere else. And we see him everywhere we look. I think that God is the universe, and that the universe is conscious. I think there's good evidence to back that up. Now, if you want to find out more, here is a link you can use to obtain a free copy of my book. Thank you for your indulgence.